Hey everybody, welcome to our first little teaching video for the first writing seminar of the quarter. Before we get started, I just want to provide some context for why I'm not back in person. Just in case anyone was curious, I am at a higher risk of getting COVID and having problems from it because I've got pretty bad asthma. So I am hanging out at my parents' house until it's a little safer to travel. Until then, I'll be attending class remotely. Hope to be back in person. We'll see when that can be. I miss you guys. And then I'm planning on holding most of our seminars remotely, at least the first two, and we'll see about the third one. As nice as it is to work together in the same space, I think even under the best of circumstances, we'll still be being pretty cautious and limiting how much in-person socializing we're able to do in the next couple of months. And consequently, I don't want to force you guys to spend your limited availability for in-person interaction on a writing seminar. I think you guys have friends and family and loved ones that you'd rather be in person with, and we can do this remotely with very little trouble. It's actually kind of convenient because I get to screen share everybody's papers as we talk about them. So I think it'll work pretty smoothly. I'm open to feedback as always, so please let me know if something's not working for you. This is kind of an experiment. I mean, a lot of writing instructors have been doing these remotely this whole time, but for me, it's an experiment because I've only held one remotely. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit more direct insight into why I'm thinking that's the best choice for us, and to reiterate that your education means a lot to me, but I would feel very, very bad if any one of you got sick because I made you come in to an in-person writing seminar. And so I think it's the best for now, and we'll see how that goes. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into arguments or review. We are talking about arguments again, which is not the biggest surprise because they are the most significant thing about a paper. So when you work on them, most of your work will go into really making sure your argument is saying what you want it to be saying. And I put a picture of a capybara because I couldn't think of a funny writing meme for this page. So yeah, come on, there we go. Arguments, what do? Well, as we've said before, they make specific claims grounded in a specific close reading of textual evidence from whatever object you're working with, paper, another paper, a book, a movie, whatever it is. That's what arguments are really about. They're making specific claims grounded in that textual evidence. But they also combine those specific claims about pieces of your evidence into a larger overarching main claim that expresses really the heart of what you're getting at, your answer to the question that the prompt poses. This we've talked about before, but what we haven't really specifically talked about is that there's a second element to what this main claim actually does, which is it doesn't just answer the question in the prompt, but it also answers why that matters. This can be called the stakes of your claim, because like the stakes of a situation in a movie feels more meaningful if it's got high stakes. You're like, oh, what's going to happen? Like the end of Uncut Gems had high stakes. It was a very tense film. Don't know why that's the first one that came to mind. But in a similar way, you want your paper to have high stakes because you want the reader to be invested in your claim. You want your claim. You don't just want to convince them your claim is right. You also want them to care about your claim being right. You want your claim to have meaning beyond just a truth value. This can also be called the so what element. That's what a lot of writing interns call it. So if you go to the tutors or talk to anybody else in the writing program, they'll sometimes call it stakes, but they'll sometimes call it the so what element of the paper. And that's tied into your main claim. And so that's really what we're going to be focusing on today, in addition to what arguments don't do. What do arguments not do? Well, they don't just provide evidence and examine the themes of an object like a text, like the Odyssey, without making a clear claim, because that's not really an argument, that's more a discussion. And that's got its place in the classroom, but it's not really the point of a paper. The point of a paper is to make a specific claim based on that evidence and your exploration of those ideas. Another thing papers don't do is explain the evidence without actually stating why it matters. So sometimes in a paper, we all do this, I do it, and you'll see that I do it when we get to the textual examples, because we're roasting my writing today, is give an explanation and then sort of like go in a different direction without ever really saying why that explanation is important. Some explanation definitely has its role in papers, especially long papers like a thesis or a journal article where you're writing for like 15, 20, 30 pages about a topic, and it might not be a topic that the entire audience is familiar with. Then you'll want to put more explanation and put more context into that paper. That's the kind of paper where you'll see those longer introductions that have multiple sections and really get into, this is what the object is, let me explain it to you so that I can then unpack why it matters that that is what it is. But because the papers we're writing in this class are very concise, with their 3 to 4 pages for this assignment and 5 to 7 for the last assignment, what that means is you really don't want too much explanation. A little bit of context can be really helpful and powerful in getting the reader to understand where you're coming from on an issue and why you're thinking about it the way you're thinking about it. But that's the key part. You can't just provide explanation without bringing that back into your evidence and your claim, without using that explanation of the evidence to contextualize further points that builds into your argument. That's what's important. Explanation without a claim is not an argument, but explanation can be a nice, useful building block to make an argument. Here's an example from my thesis. I'm gonna let you pause the video here, take some time to read this. All right, welcome back. So in this section of my thesis, what I was doing was trying to describe a stylistic choice made by the authors of a graphic novel. So there aren't actual quotes in here because I'm describing visual evidence, but it works much the same way that quoted textual evidence would work. So basically what this passage contains is some explanation, but I don't actually make a claim about what I'm explaining. I just say that I kind of make a claim by saying that these artists use these spirit figures to convey danger and protection. That's kind of a claim, but it's weak. It's obvious, so it really functions less like an actual argument and more like a statement of fact. So yeah, this is kind of just like, and here is a statement of fact, and here are some descriptions of how that statement of fact is used in different cultural contexts, in different media, in real life protests, tattoos, none of which is actually building to a larger argument. This is all just providing context and explanation. So again, that could have its place in a larger paper. Clearly, I thought it had its place in my thesis. I'm rethinking that now because it's a lot of words saying very little. Moving on. Again, I'm going to give you a minute to read. So here, pause, and then come back when you're done. I'm reading. I hope that you see that this passage has more of an argument to make, more of something to say. Feel free to disagree with what I'm arguing here, but I hope you do agree that at the very least that there is a claim being made, namely that the stories being told in this graphic novel have a political element, not only in their content, but in the way they're formatted as a representative visual storytelling medium and by the use of broken up graphic panel styles. So I'm making a claim here, and that's what sets it apart from the previous passage, which was pretty much just describing evidence and explaining how it worked in the text. It sort of made a little claim, but not enough to really call it an argumentative passage. And I felt comfortable doing that in my paper that these are from, because that paper was like 30 pages, 40 pages long. So if it were a shorter paper, I would not have devoted that much real estate to explanation. That's not to say explanation has no place. Again, it has a place. Everybody needs a little context. You need to explain what you're talking about a little bit. But if you're talking about a familiar work to an audience familiar with that work, like you are in this class, then your arguments really get to be these neat, tight arguments that you don't really get to see much in the world of like more general academic publishing, because you're talking just to people who know these works. So you don't need to provide all of that background. They know exactly what you're talking about when you pull a scene from book 11. They know what's going on. And that's great, because it means you can really just focus your skills on making those claims and talking about why that scene matters, not just for this argument, but for your whole perspective on the book. And that's great. So that's what we're going to talk through as we hold these seminars this week, is moments of explanation and whether they serve the argument or feel divorced from it. And if they feel divorced from it, what we can do to handle that. That's the primary focus. Just a review. That's pretty much what I've been saying. But in case you wanted a little written piece, I'm a visual learner, not an auditory learner. So I would screenshot something like this because that's how my brain works. Now let's talk about the so what part of an argument. The so what part of your argument is what ties your claims back to the reader and their motivations. It gives them a reason why you're writing about what you're writing about. So for an example, last quarter, a lot of people wrote about the story of Lee the ghost girl and her slipper, and really focused in on the meaning of that slipper. And that's great. And it was great because you guys provided a reason why it mattered that the slipper was portrayed in the way it was, that the claims you made about the slipper were true. You provided reasons for them that had meaning, like the slipper can be interpreted as representative of Lee and what that means for Lee as a female figure, as a ghost in the human world. You made claims that had stakes. And that's what we really want to be seeing. So that was great. We need a reason, not just a well-written argument, because you could come up with any number of ways to answer one of the prompts that you've been asked to answer. For the one on guests and hosts, you could pick any relationship in the Odyssey to study. And that's a lot of freedom. And that can be intimidating. But I think often what happens when you pick a prompt is you're drawn because you have a certain interpretation of it. And if you don't and you want to spitball, please come to office hours, we can talk. I'm always happy to hear your ideas and be a sounding board. But sometimes, if we're lucky, we get inspired to write a paper. We get a sort of feeling of, oh, I think that the meaning of this particular relationship between quote unquote mentor, who's really Athena, and Telemachus, for example, is just really profound, and it has implications for the larger meaning of guest and host relations in the book as a whole. That is a claim that is specific about one relationship, but also has stakes for the reader and their interpretation of the Odyssey more generally. It has a so what. There's a so what. I know that's a little nebulous of a concept, so if you ever have any questions, like I'm always, my email door is always open. And here's why it matters. If you don't tell your reader the so what, they might miss it. Because unfortunately they can't read between the lines of your paper as well as we think they can. And that's true of all writers and all readers. As a writer, you look at what you've written and you know what you were thinking when you wrote it. And you go, oh, I understand what I'm saying here. But somebody else who hasn't been there with you as you developed all these thoughts might just really not get it. And so they might ask after finishing your paper, okay, but so what? And then you'd have to tell them, but you shouldn't have to tell them because you've already written it, you know? That's why the so what is so important. All right, what's on deck? Well, this seminar, we're going to go over the rubric in the syllabus. I hope that you are excited by this rubric and not intimidated. If you are intimidated, that's a valid feeling. but it's an unpleasant one. So that's why I hope you're excited. If you have any questions about it or any concerns, please ask me. And if I don't know the answer, I will ask Professor Decant and I will let you know what he says. You can also always ask Professor Decant yourselves, but if you want an intermediary, I'm always here. He's very approachable, as I'm sure you figured out. Anyway, after we go over the rubric and talk about what that means for your paper writing process this quarter, we'll do the usual workshopping as a group. I have a brief little worksheet that I want you to keep in mind while you read everybody's drafts and your own draft, just to provide a different perspective on your own writing as well. Try to get in the mindset of a peer while you read your own work. You don't have to prepare to talk about anyone in particular's draft or anything. We're all just going to show up having read them and open the floor to discussion for each paper and see what the class thinks. If you have any questions or concerns or need to change your assigned seminar time, feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to accommodate as much as I can. And I look forward to seeing you all virtually. Unfortunately, not in person, but I think it'll be really, really fun and productive. So till then.